Okay, hi there, and welcome to our latest growth and development profile video. We're going to take a few minutes to look at Mozambique, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, riven in the past by civil war. The last one ended in 1992, but now a nation that might be able to take advantage of big discoveries of natural gas, perhaps to fast track improvements in basic living standards and development outcomes. Mozambique remains one of the poorest countries in the world, with a per capita income of just over $1,100 PPP adjusted, and it sits 180th in the Human Development Index for 2019. You'll see here some familiar development issues for countries which are low-income nations. Over 40% of children under the age of 5 are malnourished. Healthy life expectancy at birth is just over 50 years. The Gini coefficient is one of the highest in the world at 0.54. So there's some significant basic development issues there to address. But notice that inward investment, 5-year average, is 18% of GDP, which is linked, of course, to, as we'll see, to the huge investments being made in the liquefied natural gas industry. Mozambique is also one of those countries with the highest levels of overseas aid dependence in net terms, an inflow recently of over 14% of their GDP. Looking at some other development indicators, health spending is 5% of GDP, which sounds reasonable, but as we'll see in a few minutes, that doesn't translate into a high level of spending in dollars or pounds. There's a high level of income inequality. As we know, the Gini coefficient is 0.54. The bottom 40% of the population generate only just over 10% of the income. The richest, the best off 10%, have 45% of the income. Less than one female in 7 has had at least some secondary education. Nearly 50% of the population is in severe multi-dimensional poverty. So these are significant issues. Healthcare spending, good example. It's 5% of GDP, but because Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world, if we look at per capita health spending per person measured in dollars rather than a share of GDP, we see that Mozambique has the third lowest health spending in the world. In 2016, it was under $20 per person per year. Staggeringly low level of healthcare spending. I mentioned multi-dimensional poverty, and Mozambique, nearly half of the population is in severe multi-dimensional poverty. This is an index well worth looking at when studying development economics. It takes into account a much wider range of indicators, I think 10 in all, than the conventional HDI. And check out a special video, a 5-minute video on multi-dimensional poverty. I'll put a link in the comment section of this video. Mozambique has a floating exchange rate, the Metical. It's part of the Southern African Development Community and also a signatory to the new African Continental Free Trade Zone. Important for their future, I think. Corporation tax pretty high. Low competitiveness, just about one of the least competitive countries in the world according to the World Economic Forum. High level of corruption, Transparency International rankings shown there. And again, Mozambique needs to improve its ease of doing business, according to the latest data from the World Bank. Now, Mozambique has been a fast-growing country, but the growth has not been uniform. The average growth was 7% in the 20 years from 1998 to 2018. And indeed, it's one of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa with a pretty consistently high growth rate. But notice that the growth rate stalled in 2019. Mozambique was hit by a particularly damaging cyclone, which emphasises the vulnerability of the country to extreme weather and the threats from climate change. Look at the IMF forecast in orange for growth, particularly 2 or 3 years out from where we are now, with growth expected to climb to 9 and perhaps as much as 11, nearly 12%, as the likely impact of the liquefied natural gas investments come on stream to drive growth. Mozambique is about the 98th biggest export country in the world. It's also has a low level of complexity. So this is the data for 2017. The coke and coal industry is a dominant source of exports, petroleum and gas picking up. Aluminium is also a really important export. So the world price of aluminium is a key factor in their terms of trade and their balance of trade. And of course, the agricultural sector is also an important exporter, from coconuts, cashews to raw tobacco. So Mozambique, of course, is a country highly exposed to changes in world demand and prices of basic commodities: aluminium, raw aluminium, tobacco, farm goods and gas. Now, the key reason I've chosen Mozambique for this short video is it's a great example of where the discovery of natural resources has the potential to make Mozambique become a major exporter of liquefied natural gas. Will this be transformative for the Mozambique economy? According to recent research, Mozambique has got huge reserves of natural gas, perhaps 100 trillion cubic feet, and you can see this chart here. It's already got 7% of the discoverable natural gas resources in Africa in 2018, behind Algeria, Nigeria and South Africa. So, and two of the projects in terms of the capacity of natural gas liquefaction projects are two of the biggest in the world, as you can see from this chart in 2019. So this has the potential to be tremendously important for Mozambique. Carlos Lopez, the African economist on the right hand side here, reporting recently, summer of 2019, that Anadarko expects to announce a final investment decision of a $20 billion investment in the Mozambique liquefied natural gas project, an investment nearly twice the size of the economy. Fast forward to recently, just a few days ago, Anadarko has been taken over by, the project's been taken over by the French business Total. But again, a $23 billion investment project, which is huge in the context of the Mozambique economy. So this raises the interesting economics question, which is common in exams. Assess the potential benefits of the discovery of, and then the extraction, hopefully the refining of, natural resources. Will the significant natural gas resources discovered in Mozambique in 2010, will they create a windfall effect which is transformative for the economy? Lots of potential benefits. The resource revenues from natural gas could be used perhaps for Mozambique to create a sovereign wealth fund, as many other countries have done, such as Norway, to invest those natural resource rents into the domestic economy. Clearly, it's going to provide a potentially significant boost to their net exports of gas, leading to higher aggregate demand and also new jobs in engineering projects, in construction of railways and ports and other logistics sectors. The extra export revenue could also allow Mozambique, a poor country, to import the machinery, the technology and the other inputs needed perhaps to raise productivity in their farm sector to lift rural incomes. So in theory, the discovery of and then the extraction of liquefied natural gas will cause an outward shift of the Mozambique PPF, of their long and aggregate supply curve, an increase in aggregate demand, leading to a faster rate of trend growth. I'm sure you can visualize in your own mind the kind of ADAS diagram that could be used there, or perhaps a developed PPF diagram. However, many of you will know, if you've studied resource economics, that for many countries the discovery of natural resources turns out to be a curse rather than a blessing. The rents, the income from natural resources, rarely lead to inclusive growth. That's growth that really benefits, if you like, the poorest 40% of the population. There's a failure to turn the wealth discovered beneath the ground to turn it into human capital that lies above. Mozambique has borrowed heavily to finance the LNG projects. The government doesn't necessarily have their own domestic resources to fund it, and that has led to a significant increase in external debt measured as a share of GDP. One of the other risks is that if Mozambique then starts to export the natural gas, that could cause the matala, the currency, to appreciate, go up in value, and that could then make other export sectors, the coal mine sector, tuna fishing, light manufacturing, less competitive. Some economists call that the Dutch disease effect. The surge in investment into gas extraction and refining has also led to huge growth of property speculation, inflows of money into the Mozambique financial system, which has increased property prices and has also caused a rise in inflation, which could threaten growth in other parts of the economy. And crucially, natural resource wealth is seen by Professor Paul Collier as one of the key development traps. It's often a root cause of civil conflict, trying to battle for the rights to share the revenues, particularly in a country where corruption is high. And it's also increased the risk from, if you like, the returns from terrorism, which threatens political stability. Inflation in Mozambique has been very high. It was well above 150% in the mid-1980s during the Civil War. It has been as high as 35, 40, 50% in the mid-1990s. Then it came down, and relatively stable inflation in recent times, although you can see here that inflation picked up to nearly 20% in 2016 and remains fairly high certainly by advanced country status. And the other aspect is this borrowing, the fact that Mozambique as a country is poor. The government has had to take out some significant loans from the private sector, from the World Bank, to help finance the infrastructure needed to support the liquefied natural gas projects. You can see from this chart quite clearly how external debt has more than doubled in Mozambique. That's debt owed to overseas creditors, from about 40% of GDP in 2012 to now well over 80% in 2019-2020. Mozambique is a country which in theory has plenty of potential for catch-up. It has a young, fast-growing population. It hasn't really urbanised yet, so lots of scope for catch-up growth in the Mozambique economy. And LNG gas could well be a catalyst for that growth to happen. However, there are also important barriers to growth. Let's think about some of them. Firstly, Mozambique is a good example of a country to think about which is highly exposed to extreme weather. The impact of the recent cyclone is a good case in point. Mozambique is also a country which has suffered a loss of natural capital. There has been extensive deforestation. I think they lose something like 1% of their forest area every year. And that's an important issue. Perhaps you can use some of the revenues from natural gas to invest in reforestation projects. There is, as you'd expect with a very poor country, a huge infrastructure deficit. Basic infrastructure, health, housing, sanitation, especially in the poorest rural areas. And as we're seeing, the Gini coefficient is tremendously high, 0.54. There's a lot of income inequality and multidimensional poverty which holds back growth. Mozambique's growth suffers from high levels of corruption, which can limit FDI, and fundamentally weak human capital. The expected and mean years of schooling are low. Majority of the Mozambique labour force does not have the skills to be able to participate in those kind of big engineering infrastructure projects which the government is pursuing. And Mozambique has low economic complexity. It's another good example of a country heavily reliant on farming, fishing, coal, graphite, and of course now gas. There's little in the way of indigenous manufacturing industry. Indeed, manufacturing is less than 10% of their GDP. So why use Mozambique as an exam case study? Lots of good reasons. In fact, Mozambique has been used as a data response question by exam boards in the past. Great example to think about in terms of whether the discovery of natural gas is a blessing or a curse for Mozambique. To what extent does rapid growth, 7, 8, 9%, perhaps even higher, does that lead to improved human development outcomes? What are the causes of the high level of income inequality in Mozambique? What are the consequences of inequality as a barrier to growth? And crucially, how can a low-income country such as Mozambique address the challenges of climate change? Lots of reasons why Mozambique could be a really good country to be aware of and add to your economic development revision notes. Okay, thank you.